In this video, I will showcase to you a lot of different characters and teams I've tested with this Yunjin's build, and while it's clear that her main utility is to power up normal attacks, you'd be surprised that not every teammate who specializes in normal attacks will get the same amount of value when compared between each other. Before we begin, I quickly want to go over her talents because I think it's important to acknowledge Yunjin's overall design. So her elemental skill is pretty interesting because you can just either press it and gain 2 particles, or if you hold it down, then by getting to this animation, which is called the level 2 charge, you can release and gain 3 particles. This is important because Yunjin's biggest struggle is energy recharge when she's the only Geo teammate, and that's going to be a common scythe when using her. Also, thanks to her passive talent, her press version of the skill can be timed against enemy attack and immediately resolve as a level 2 charge version, which is great for those who are skilled enough to pull it off. And of course, the skill provides a certain amount of damage absorption during its activation, similar to how Beto's burst works. Now, the other big thing that needs a bit of an explanation would be her burst. If you haven't seen my latest Shenhe video where I go over how the actual damage buff works, well, all you really need to know is that Yunjin, just like Shenhe, provides a portion of her own stat as a damage buff, which in this case is defense, and then it gets applied to the next 30 normal attacks. But unlike your traditional buffers like Bennett and Kujo Sara, this buff that a character gets can only be further improved with that character's elemental or physical damage bonus, critical damage, and by reducing enemies' defense as well as resistance. But don't worry, if you're still unsure what this means, I'll show you a lot of interesting showcases later in the video. So, the main way how Yunjin can be built is by utilizing her as a pure support character, which means sacrificing her own damage potential in order to get the best results when boosting teammates with her burst. Which is why when we're talking about weapons, you really want a polearm with energy recharge substat, and since there's 4 options to go for, the most realistic one is probably going to be either Favonius Lance or Prototype Star Glitter, because Engulfing Lightning and Skyward Spine are more like premium options to go for when no one else needs these 5-star weapons. There's also the catch, but it's also only reasonable enough on her if no one else can utilize this powerful free-to-play weapon. Now, if it does come down to picking between Star Glitter and Favonius, the former provides 15% more energy recharge from its substat, but Favonius is obviously better energy-wise because of its passive, although this would also mean that you would need to build at least 25% to 40% critical rate in order to trigger the effect consistently, which is easier said than done. Finally, if you're wondering about defense polearms, there's really only Deathmatch, so I wouldn't recommend going for this weapon unless you somehow manage to reach the recommended energy recharge. But even then, something like Favonius Lance is just way more beneficial for the whole team because of the particles it can generate. Now, when looking at her artifact set choices, all of them are pretty much situational. There isn't really one that can be described as best in slot, but the baseline is going to be the sets that provide either energy recharge or defense. For example, you could go for a budget option of double 2 set of Husk and Defender's Will to maximize on her defense, or instead, you could also go for double 2 sets of Husk and Emblem to get a balanced take on both stats. There's obviously the 4 set of Husk, but you know how hard it can be to obtain decent artifacts, and the difference isn't that huge when it comes to using the previously mentioned sets and comparing the overall boost she will provide. Also, Archaic Petra can be used, but just keep in mind that Yunjin has to be the one who picks up the shard, and while her skill can sometimes help her get it quickly, it's still hard to use this set in places like the Abyss where it can get chaotic. Finally, if no one in the party has Noblesse Oblige, well, that's also an option you can go for. But look, the main idea with all these stats is to prioritize getting at least 200% energy recharge, which means you'll more than likely need to have energy sense, although going full defense can be done if you get really lucky with ER substats. And obviously, if you're using Favonius Lance, then you'll need some critical rate as well. As an honorable mention, you can build Yunjin as a traditional sub-damage dealer, but since her skill and burst scale on different stats, it's not going to be ideal, and most of the damage will come from her skill, which means you have to sacrifice defense just so you can have better critical rate and damage ratio, which is fine if you're only doing world exploration, but in the Abyss, that's not going to work out pretty well. Anyway, here's how I've built my Yunjin by equipping her with a 4-piece Husk set, but only because I got lucky with a lot of these pieces ending up with energy recharge substat on them, although at the same time, there's also no critical rate to be found with them. So this meant I had to go for my underleveled Star Glitter, but I did end up with around 211% energy recharge and 2670 defense. To fully understand how Yunjin's buff works and in what kind of teams you can include her in, I think it's best to first take a look at the actual numbers of the buff. So this is a level 90 C0 Yunjin with a burst raised to level 9, and she's got around 2850 defense. Now our first test subject is going to be Yoimiya, and I'll use critical boosting food just so I can have an easier time creating the footage and to show you the best case scenario numbers when you end up with all critical hits. So without any buffs and using Shimenawa's Force Set, Yoimiya will deal around 62,945 damage by unloading her whole normal attack combo, but with Yunjin's buff, this comes out to almost 94,000 damage, which is about 49% increase in total damage output when you score all critical hits. That's quite a substantial jump in damage, but what about Benny Boy and his buff? Well, he ends up providing about 2,500 more overall damage. However, keep in mind his burst talent is at level 12, and he has Aquila Favonia equipped, as well as Noblesse Oblige Force Set, so as a C0 Yunjin, almost getting close to the same numbers as a heavily invested Constellation 5 Benny Boy, well, that's kind of impressive in my opinion. But the most important thing you'll notice when comparing their buffs is that Bennett's burst works better on higher damage multipliers, because his attack buff actually gets multiplied, while with Yunjin, you can see how much better it is compared to Bennett's when it is a smaller damage multiplier and if there's multiple hits, which means consuming multiple stacks. This is because her damage buff is placed on top of Yoimiya's damage multiplier, and it will always result in worse performance when a character she buffs is slow and deals bigger hits. Now keep this in mind, this is just Yunjin's buff only. If you use her with someone like Kazuha, you can see the damage skyrocket because with Viridescent Artifact set, he will shred away enemies' pyro resistance and provide Yoimiya with additional pyro damage bonus, both of which have an impact on Yunjin's damage buff and results in really good improvement to damage. But the main takeaway here when it comes to understanding the value of Yunjin's buff is that first, a character needs to have fast attack animations, so they can use up the 30 stacks Yunjin provides, and the best results will come with small damage multipliers because of the way Yunjin's buff works. Also, it's important to mention that with someone like Ito, Ningguang, Keqing, and Ayaka, the majority of their damage comes from either charged attacks or skill or burst, but not normal attacks. So while Yunjin isn't really bad with them, in all honesty, any other support will be a better choice for them. But I also want to talk about Noelle. While her 4-hit normal attack is pretty slow, she still gets about 20% damage increase if you unload her whole combo. However, it is important to mention that while this isn't really impressive against a single target, since Noelle gets a really wide reach with her infused burst, this will become a better outcome against multiple enemies, which I think now would be the best time to talk about some teams and characters you can build with Yunjin included. Keep in mind that while her passive encourages to build rainbow teams of different elements, you shouldn't focus too much on it because it's more like a nice to have thing than a necessity. So obviously, Yoimiya so far has the best synergy with Yunjin because of how fast her normal attacks are, and using them both in a mono pyro team with an animal character to shred away the enemy's defense provided the best results, but this also meant not having a healer unless it's Sayu or Jean, or you can also go for Benny Boy to get more damage, but if you're doing Abyss, it's possible you might need him in other teams as well. But besides this, there's also the double Geo Pyro variation that you could go for if you have Zhongli. Speaking of which, even if Noelle doesn't get a major boost from Yunjin, you can easily build a cohesive team together with Goro, who by now is considered to be the most valuable team member for Noelle, but at the same time, you can create a comp from these characters and then either get another Geo teammate or someone else if no one has any kind of energy problems. But those were the obvious choices, and here's when my favorite part of the video starts, exploring physical teams. There's actually quite a lot of them you can boost, starting with Zhongli and Xiangling, who can utilize Crescent Pike really well, although sadly the weapon's passive does not benefit from Yunjin's stacks, and also, since both Zhongli and Xiangling want to trigger Superconduct to lower enemies' resistance, you'll need to fill the last few spots with Electro and Cryo teammates like Fischl, Diona, or Rosaria. But then there's our favorite Wolf Boy, who seems like everyone forgot about, and the nice thing about him is that his burst gives him a significant attack boost, and the attacks are pretty wide, so it's easy to consume the stacks with Yunjin. Now my personal favorite team so far is Physical Fischl, Beidou, and one of the Cryo teammates, because Beidou's burst gives a nice boost to attack speed, and Fischl can really go crazy when paired together with Yunjin, although her normal combo does have this long delay that you need to either dash cancel or aim cancel out of it to save time. I think it's pretty clear by now that Yunjin is definitely someone worth considering to add to your team if you want to create a comp centered around normal attacks or physical damage. Obviously, if we get more elemental normal attackers like Yoimiya, there's always Anemo characters waiting to shred that elemental defense away, and along with Yunjin, make those attacks hit for bigger damage. Now before I give you my final overview, I just wanted to quickly mention her constellations and how valuable almost each of them are. So while this video was made around Constellation 0 Yunjin, most of the benefits she gets from her second to final constellation have to do with how much damage she will boost. So in the long run, each one of these upgrades are going to be significant not just for her, but for the whole team as well. Overall, just like many other supports in the game, building her isn't that hard and there's a lot of ways of doing it, so you can see the results even with not the most optimal stats. It's also great to see that her damage buffing isn't a novelty, but an actual real thing that provides a ton of benefits to characters like Yoimiya, while others like Noelle and physical damage dealers can still get a lot of value out of it. Still, she does have her own set of drawbacks, the biggest one being how much energy she needs in order to trigger her burst consistently, as well as the fact her skill and burst have different scaling stats, and it makes it hard to build her as a sub-damage dealer. It also doesn't help that her buff works best with fast attackers and smaller damage multipliers because of the way her actual damage buff is calculated. But with all of that being said, I believe Yunjin's potential will only grow in time as more different characters get added into the game. Hope you found the video useful, and if you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching, and see you soon.